Hello, everyone, and welcome back. And as promised, I'm here with Tammy. Welcome, Tammy.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's nice to see you again.
It's so nice to see you. And I can't believe I just realized this is the first time that you're coming on my podcast. So welcome. We should have done this a long time ago. I am such a big fan and I love your work and respect the work that you are putting out there. So thank you for everything that you do.
Oh, yeah, likewise. You were actually one of our first guests we had on our podcast like 2 years ago.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I always like to understand, how did somebody get to where they are today? How did you build this beautiful parenting platform? And how did you get to that?
Tanya and I, my business partner, and I are both child psychologists, and we met at actually a play therapy training, because that's one of the ways we work with kids, especially young ones. You don't do talk therapy with kids, you do play-based therapies and animal-assisted therapy. And those are my two specialties, is animal-assisted therapy and play therapy. So Tanya and I were in private practice. I said, you should come work at the place I'm working at. It's pretty great. So she started working there. And then I went off and we worked this practice for several years together. And then she moved to Florida for a while and down to the States. And I started my own group practice. And then we ended up franchising it. But then, I don't know. I was seeing kiddos and I loved my work and I love teens and kids. I just love working with children. But what I was the most frustrated with were parents who didn't want to change. They're like, fix my kid. And I'm like, well, I can get your kid to maybe, if we think of it as a 0 out of 10, I can get them to maybe an 8. But unless you make some changes at home, not to say you're being a bad parent, but we have to make adjustments, and until the system starts changing to make some accommodations and we make it, a better fit for the child, or, whatever's going on, kiddos would end up back at my office and the parents are like, it was going so well. And now here they are. And I said, well, we can do this the hard way, which is really expensive, or we can do it the easier way that it's going to be less expensive, but more arduous for you emotionally. And
Right.
that means you have to make some shifts and you have to educate yourself a little bit, because every child is different and your kiddo has really unique needs. And so I really enjoyed the parents who were like, I want to learn and I want to make changes and I want to be a better parent. And so I started teaching. At first it was libraries and then at universities. And then I knocked on Tanya's door saying, I think we have something here. I think parents want to learn to be better parents. There's this, and teachers and other psychologists. So that's kind of how the Institute came to be, is we just really wanted to work with parents and professionals who wanted to shift the dynamic. And this is before the conscious parenting movement. So parents were asking for information what do I do with ADHD? What do I do with anxiety? What do I do with this? And so we started training parents on how to intervene in mental health in their home. Doesn't mean you can't, go to therapy, but therapy was always accessible to parents. And often with kids, it's the wrong type of therapy because talk therapy is not meant for kids. So they didn't have that kind of therapy available. So it worked better if the intervention simply came from the parents.
So the Institute of Child Psychology has been around for a long time now, hasn't it?
Yeah, about 8 years. We've been doing this, I don't know, a long time, but it's morphed, and it's, we do the podcasting too and summits, and
Right.
But it started off as live events in person with big audiences of parents who would come in and are like, I want to be a better parent. My kid has anxiety or ADHD or trauma. What the heck do I do? And so we started developing, step-by-step protocols, being like, this is what you can do. This is how you change things at home for this kiddo. These are things for diet, and here's for what to do with big feelings. And these are the type of therapies you can do. And here are strategies that I would use in therapy. We adjust them, of course, for parents to be ethical, but still so much of this work can actually be done at home. I think actually probably 70 to 80% of it can be done at home. So to me, I want parents to have that information.
Right. That's a very high percentage. And I agree with you, I think this is also the part that can be really difficult for parents, right? It's like, okay, I'm managing the day, the day to day, and there's a lot of work. And by the end of the day, I'm emotionally drained. And now I think, you're seeing all this education and saying, well, you can't fix your kid, but here's what you can do to the environment. And you see this and you're like, oh, I don't have the capacity for it. Is that the sort of resistance you see in terms of sometimes I don't, not having the energy or the struggling to kind of find that?
Like the parents themselves, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of parents, and I think it's shifted a lot since COVID, are burnt out. And that makes a lot of sense. They're working a lot. Things are very expensive right now. Parents are tapped out. We had this collective trauma. Parents are becoming more isolated. So, yes, that's part of it is I think it's just low resources psychologically. Like they just need
Right.
need a break. And I think
Yeah.
I think that speaks to our system of mental health as a whole in Western
Yeah.
culture.
Yeah. That needs
And
to change.
yeah, and some of
Yeah.
it is, I think, parents not understanding how when they were quite young, certain needs weren't met, and those unmet needs are now rearing their ugly head in terms of their parenting. And that's not always fun to acknowledge. And it's not, some parents aren't prepared to go down that rabbit hole of my own wounds are coming up for me. And it's almost easier to sometimes scapegoat our kids, being like, there's something wrong with them, rather to kind of look inward and say, I may need to work on some of this.
Right.
That
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
parents did the
I
best they
agree.
could, but I was not equipped to come into to have these kids and to help them manage these feelings because no one showed me how to do it. And that's the issue. There's those neural networks aren't formed. Like how to deal with crying and yelling, or even having empathy during a tantrum. Like if that was a gift never given to them, it's really hard to give that to your child.
And that's what I hear from parents mostly around emotions as well, right? Where like the tantrum that you're talking about is something that triggers a parent. It's like, why am I angry that my child is, crying? Or why am I not feeling that empathy and the compassion? I'm just really frustrated and annoyed by this tantrum. Part of it is kind of digging into why is it making you feel that way? I agree with you, like it's sometimes part of we didn't receive that. And I'm glad that parents are reaching out and looking for resources like yours, saying, how do I, knowing that I didn't receive these tools, knowing that I didn't receive this as a child, now what do I do? How do I teach this to my child? And how do I model this to my child? Are you seeing the same with your community?
Yeah, I think so. I think more and more parents are understanding their wounds. I think therapy is becoming more mainstream.
Right.
And I think parents are wanting to do better. I think the biggest challenge is the pendulum always swings. It's this way in education as well, where many of us grew up with these parenting experiences where emotions were swept under the rug and we were yelled at or we were spanked, or like my husband jokes about, getting the his dad making him get a tree branch, when he wasn't listening, and
Right. Yeah.
whipping him with it. Not hard, but enough that it was scary, like getting locked out of the house when they weren't listening. Like there were
Right.
these, it's just what you did. And then we now have this generation of parents who doesn't want to parent that way, and they want to be present and they don't want their children to feel alone. But sometimes we go to the opposite extreme where we want to, I want to say in quotes, if anyone's seeing this as a video, like gentle parent, but that can also mean we're just uncomfortable with the feelings, and then we end up being permissive because
Right.
the feelings still scare us. Like we're not going to yell, and we may not spank, and we may not lock their kid in their room, but we're so dysregulated by our kids' feelings still. So we're very shaken by it. And sometimes that means we just want to placate them. We just give them the cookie. We don't set the limit. We just walk away in frustration. And I think the walking away is okay as long as we come back and when we're more regulated, of course, and it's better than hitting your child. But it's an interesting kind of swing the other direction where parents don't know what to do. Like they know they don't want to yell and they know they don't want to hit, but they're not sure how to lead their kids. And so either way, there's a discomfort with feelings, like no matter what way we frame it, whether we're just sitting there and we're walking away in a huff and just we're giving them the thing that they want after they had the tantrum just to like make it stop versus screaming at them. Either way, it's I'm uncomfortable with this meltdown. I'm really uncomfortable with this situation and I don't know how to handle it.
I love that you just said this because this is one thing that I hear from parents where you just said, like, I don't know how to lead my child, right? And I think it's because, like you said, it's coming from that background of I was I was not supported in a certain way, right, when it came to emotions. And now I want to do the opposite. I want to do something that's best for my child or better for my child. But like you said, they don't know how. And now I here in Montreal, I work with schools and school boards, and teachers that have, kindergarten teachers in grade 1 and grade 2 are talking about like struggles with like having a child follow a boundary and a limit and the rules inside the classroom. So
Yeah.
And they often bring that up to my attention in terms of like, what do we do now? And so it leads to me giving workshops to parents and trying to talk to them about what does parenting look like? What are the styles that we see inside of research, and the authoritarian, authoritative, permissive, and neglectful, and what does that look like? And often parents will say at the end of this workshop, they'll say, I hadn't realized, but I think I'm more towards permissive when I
Yeah.
didn't do that intentionally, right? So I don't think it's coming from a place of that's the kind of parent I want to be. I think it's coming from a place of I want to make sure that I don't yell at my child, I don't spank them, I'm not like authoritarian in the way that I was raised, but now I don't know how to navigate those big emotions.
Yeah, I think Brene Brown said it really well when she said that parenting without boundaries is like allowing a child to run across a suspension bridge without handrails.
Oh my gosh, yeah. That's a great analogy.
Yeah, so I that is the hardest dance,
Yeah.
is to say I'm one, I have to be okay with all the messy feelings that encompasses parenting. But I also have to be prepared to set some pretty hard limits with my kids, like to be able to say no, and that's
Yeah.
not okay. And then not take it personally when they don't like it. And I think that's the hardest thing for parents is we're like, okay,
Yeah.
I have to set a limit, right? And then you set the limit. No cookie, no more screen time, whatever this is. No, this is not okay. You may not hit your brother. And then the kid
Right.
explodes. Who knew a child wouldn't like when you say no? Like, it's almost like parents expect them to enjoy the limit. And then I always have to say that's not the point. Like, your child isn't, no, this isn't always the case, but often the case is the reason they're acting out in the first place is that they have an abundance of stress hormones in their body. They're very overwhelmed by something that has nothing to do with this moment. They're picking the fight because they're full of fight, they're full of stress. And so when you set the limit, which is needed, what often happens is a big, explosion. The child says, "You're the worst mom ever. Yeah, I hate you," and crying and throwing things.
Yes. Exactly.
And that's actually the answer to the problem. But the parents are like, it's the problem now. I was like, actually, no, it's the answer, because this is how the body drains stress hormones. So when I think as a parent, when I figured that out, and I think I was working with Gordon Neufeld at the time, and he really talked about the release of tears and what happens in the nervous system. He's like, the tears are always the answer. And so to me, it was one of those things where I'm like, I welcomed it being like, yes, it's often, if it's in public, it can be embarrassing, but I look at it as this really healing process. Like, it's just, no, it's cathartic. And any of us as parents who've had a good cry and we're so tired after, it's like a reset button hit.
Feels
Yeah, I
good.
can tell you
Yeah.
as a therapist, I am much more concerned when clients don't cry. So if that's actually just did an intake before this, and that's one of the questions I ask, can your child cry in front of you? And if they're like, yes, I'm like, okay, well, half of the therapy's already done. Like, your kid can already do this. Like, you're doing great. I'm much more concerned when a child is stuffing their emotions down and they're getting aggressive instead of finding their tears. So I always want parents to know, being like, yes, long tantrums can be horrendous and there can be other things going on. But if we initially can come alongside those big feelings and understand, like, Mother Nature designed these very specifically to help your child. Yes, it can make our lives take a little longer. We'd end up, sitting on the floor. I've done this, sitting on the floor in Best Buy when I'm supposed to be in the car getting groceries. That being said, I'm like, my kid has a healthy nervous system, and I'm giving my child a gift right now, because when I was little, I wasn't always allowed to do that. And crying's actually, as an adult, is very hard for me now.
Yeah. Not like being giving that permission to cry. I get that. Yeah. You know, the one thing that I've heard as well regarding this is something that you mentioned where the child might say like, I hate you, you're the worst. And parents fear that putting the boundaries or setting these boundaries or these limits will lead to their child not liking them or them not being as close. And so this idea of, if I don't disappoint them or make them upset, or do anything that's negative or leads to a negative emotion, then we'll be good friends, we'll be close. Can we can we talk about this myth? Right, that they need boundaries, they do need them.
Absolutely. So first and foremost, when your child is saying, I hate you, you're the worst mom in the world, they say some horrible things to us sometimes. They're not saying I hate you, they're saying I hate this feeling.
Yeah.
That's just, you just happen to be available because it's easier to always, we do that to our spouses too. Like we take all the stuff in here and it's just easier to put on people we love. So they're not saying that. They're just saying that I hate how I feel. They don't hate you. So one, we just try not to personalize it and know that's just an expression of this turmoil they'll feel inside. The second piece I really want to convey is we're not their friends. Like we can't be. It's attachment's hierarchical. It means that it doesn't mean we are worth more than they are in any capacity. It simply means we have more knowledge and they need to be led by somebody who is wiser, who is stronger, who is more competent to scaffold the skills they need to become adults. When you become adults, you both, you've grown up because we grow up as parents and then our kids grow up. Yes, there is I feel like I'm like this with my mom. She is a friend, kind of, but at the same time, there's still that respect that she's my mother and she's older than me and she has been around a lot longer. It's not the same as my best
No,
friend.
it's not the same.
It's it.
Well, I mean, it's a connection, right? It's
It's a
a
connection.
connection with that parent.
Yeah, and I really feel that kids need to know that someone's in charge because they have a very limited toolbox. And it's very scary for a child to learn when they push a boundary that instead, they expect a wall, they get a rotating door. That's Kids need the wall to know like this isn't okay.
Yeah.
Then they know like this isn't appropriate behavior. And not only that, my parent is strong enough to say no to me. They're strong enough to keep me safe if something really bad happens. They need to know that that parent's strong to protect them if someone comes in the house or there's inclement weather or someone tries to hurt them. Like, but kids will question their parents' ability to protect them if they can't maintain boundaries because that child is now in charge. And that creates a lot of anxiety for kids to think that they hold all the power. And then that's the permissive parenting piece where we want to be friends so badly with our kids. And that might be a signal we need probably more adult relationships in our lives. Like, that we're the leaders. The same reason why bosses shouldn't be friends with their employees. There's a hierarchy there. Does that make sense? Like it's not
Right.
healthy. It's very enmeshed. Like those boundaries are very blurred then. So it doesn't mean you can't have a close relationship. That will come later though. When they're little, they need you to be in charge. They need to know they don't know how to fly the plane yet. And as they get older, we give them more autonomy. Like that comes in the teen years. Like we slowly give them more and more and we can share more and more. But it's done very slowly over many, many years. And there's going to be so much time where your kids won't like you for the nose in you, but they need them so badly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That word has come up now a few times. The leader. We are a leader. We are the person that they are looking up to in terms of what are the rules in this house, right? And what can I do? What can't I do? It doesn't mean they're not going to push them. Even if you're a strong leader, a child will push the boundaries and see, like, can I do this? Is this okay? Right? Like they're going to try those. And I think that's okay. It's not saying that you have not established the right boundaries or you're not a good leader for your child, but I think having that word in mind can support us whether a child is 2 years old or 12 years old, because at 2 we're still the leader saying no, you can't do that, and then co-regulating and supporting that child and their emotions and saying I'm here for you, but you still can't have that cookie. It's 7 o'clock, you're going to bed, right? Like that's it. That's the way that I picture it. Is that a okay way to picture it, like for a parent?
Yeah, I think, we can still give small choices, like for Pete's sake, like you still need to get them to bed.
Right.
You can give them, you can walk to the bathroom or you can hop like a bunny rabbit or we can have a race.
Sure.
Like you can be playful and give choices like, do you want to, you've got a teenager, do you want to do your homework in the living room or do you want to do your homework at the kitchen table? Like we can give them autonomy as long as we're getting them in the right direction but we're still getting what needs to be done and making sure we're not giving kids choices on big things like what they're dictating everything you're eating for dinner or when they go to bed or I don't know,
Yeah.
just like if they're going to
Yeah.
shower or not when they're little. Like there's just certain things where
Right.
we don't give away our authority. But there are some things that parents do need to let go a little bit. Now, kids will push back if they don't have some autonomy, if that makes sense. And it's this delicate dance. And this is where play comes in. And we have a book and we talk about this. Like kids need a place in their life where they can make choices and have autonomy. And what has happened in our society is we've been so focused on kids being in organized activities and on screens that there isn't a lot of places where kids get to practice being competent anymore, where they get to make
Right.
choices in developmentally appropriate ways. And because of this, you get more kids are more combative with parents because they want authority and choice somewhere in their life. And this is why Tanya and I push play so much. We're like, they have no place in their life where they're in control. So now they're trying to control you. And some pushback is normal, but part of this is symptomatic of a society that rushes kids too much, where they don't have time to be in pretend worlds and to do dress up and make Lego and play in the, in a puddle in the backyard. Like kids need this and they need that for regulation too. So part of kind of the puzzle of putting together for a child is yes, co-regulation is very important, but we have to see why kids become dysregulated as part of the question too. And sometimes it's the parents' emotions, but sometimes it's it's symptomatic of an environment not necessarily meeting all the needs of a child too, that we have to consider. And there are certain things the brain needs in order and the nervous system needs in order to be healthy so the child can regulate.
Great. Thank you for bringing up the idea of play, because that's something we covered a couple weeks ago, and that episode did very well. And people were like, "Oh yeah, okay, so tell me more about play." Like, and this is something you guys talk about. I've spoken about this before. I don't think we talk about it enough, even if we're talking about it all the time. I think people need to hear it. Here in Quebec, I know that there's a mandate to have it's play based preschool, because preschool became part of the elementary schools, but there was some resistance from both sides, parents and educators, in terms of making it play based because they wanted more academic style systems for preschool. That's not what it should be. And we need to keep talking about the importance of play. So you have mentioned autonomy and competence. And what comes to my mind is belongingness. So these three being part of.
ABCs of play: autonomy, so that's their choices; belonging, which is like social play or playing with a parent. And that can also be belonging to yourself because you feel like you have self-esteem. Like, let me be clear, Brene Brown would have a lot to say about that we feel good when we can make these creative choices ourselves. And your competence is when you can practice something over and over and over and you have the skills then to handle adversity later on. And kids always practice things in play before they do them in real life. So if kids don't have the stage in which to practice these skills socially, academically, we know play is related to all kinds of academic outcomes. You stick them in a social situation, in a school, in soccer, in dance, in a play date where they have never had a chance to practice said skills and they have no idea how to handle adversity or stress, they fall apart. So I just feel very strongly, and this is why we wrote a
Yeah,
whole chapter on this in our book. We're like, if you don't give this to kids, there's going to be mental health outcomes that you're not
right.
going to like. And we're starting to see it more and more. And as a
Yeah.
therapist, I can't believe I get paid to play with people's kids sometimes because I'm like, they should just be doing this at home. This should be part of their childhood. But kids are missing out on this. So now the therapists are getting paid to do this. Like we're getting paid to play with kids. And now, granted, it's research informed. We do certain types of play, but it's because kids are missing out on this. And we've
Right.
just
Right.
decided that, yeah, let's give them, just sit them in a desk and do flashcards and worksheets. And I'm like, our
Yeah.
brains didn't evolve to do that kind of work.
Yeah.
The coordination's not there. The brain, that executive functioning's not there. So we're putting the cart, I think, ahead of the horse there.
Yeah, and you touched on something online that I've spoken about, which was the activities. Right, we kind of fill the evenings and weekends with activities sometimes without realizing that it's taking away that downtime that's really important. That I see important for kids too, in terms of boredom and play, and just kind of being in control of what you're doing. Like you said, I'm putting together a magnetic tile tower, and nobody is telling me what to do, and nobody is directing me, and I get the autonomy to build this in the way that I want. There's a power in that downtime. Are you seeing that as well with parents, where schedules are just really overflowing with activities?
Absolutely. And my rule of thumb is like one activity at a time.
Right.
It doesn't mean
Yeah.
parents, we're not saying you can't do this. We're saying when it starts to take over the family culture and you're no longer eating dinner
Right.
together and kids
Hmm.
aren't playing and messing up your basement and they're not getting time just to play in the backyard or with the neighbors across the street, this becomes a problem or it interferes with sleep. With the brain needs to decompress so that really you studied neuroscience, you're probably familiar with the default mode network in the brain. We need time to daydream and to
Right.
sit quietly
Yeah.
and be bored, to assimilate any information we've learned and to encode long-term memory. If kids, you want them to be successful in school, their brain needs to shut down sometimes and just sit there, to go for walks, to ponder, to lay in their bed, just that relaxation and downtime in order for the brain to categorize everything that they've learned. If we constantly are in a state of entertainment and go, 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 the brain loses all the information it was supposed to take in throughout the day. So all that hard work you did in academics is pew, like gone. So it's just like, guys, there's a reason Mother Nature designed this. Like kids are supposed to be bored. They're supposed to have quiet time. They're just supposed to be at home with their siblings or with the neighbor kids. And sometimes they'll just sit there and they'll lay on the couch and stare at the ceiling. That's actually the brain doing some pretty amazing things. But like they don't tell you this when you birth a child. There's no manual that says like these things are good. Expect your child to be bored. It's okay.
Exactly. I know. And that's why we have to keep talking about it. And, there's no handbook, but now there is, right? There's the parenting handbook and you have your book. I want to take a moment to highlight that
Yeah, it's right here.
because it's really, so for those of you who are listening, we will put the link in the show notes to her book. And I think it's really important for us to talk about that. Everything we're talking about is kind of like highlighting how the pendulum has swung a little bit too much towards a certain direction where, again, I think it was from good intention, but it comes from a good place, but it's just that we've lost sight of what we should be doing and the importance of boundaries, the importance of rules, and the importance of downtime. Another one is you talked about boredom. We tend to fill these gaps, and it comes again because I think we do this sometimes because emotions will come about the same way that if we set a boundary and our child gets upset, well, if they're bored, it becomes uncomfortable for them and it becomes uncomfortable for us. And then what do? We fill it up with screen time. Sure, turn on the TV. Here's an iPad. Here's my phone. Just stop complaining. And I think that we have to catch ourselves in those moments. With everything that I do here, I'd never want a parent to feel bad, but I want them to gain insight and say, well, tomorrow, what can I do differently? And so, what have you shared in terms of your book or your work in terms of supporting a parent who might notice, okay, my child has never been bored because I fill in those gaps. How can I stop that, knowing that there's going to be pushback?
The biggest thing I would say is you're gonna have to lock up your screens. Literally. Yeah, we lock them up. We bought something from Amazon that locks everyone's devices away. That was the biggest one. Or be getting an app that turns off the Wi-Fi in your house. Like I think that so we aren't tempted to run to screens right away. And for it, depending if you have young kids or teenagers, is making sure we have ample stuff to they can entertain themselves with. You'd be surprised, like if you have things like even my 10-year-old will, because we say no screen. So she's allowed to play music though. So she listens to, we have an MP3 player for her. And she's making doll houses out of cardboard now. And we have hot glue guns. And so she's
I love it.
just designing these dolls that she does these elaborate plays with. And my son has now, he reads. Like if he can't have a screen, he's learned to read graphic novels. He really enjoys that. And my 16-year-old is busy on our farm, so she does a lot of stuff outdoors. That's her big thing, and loves to listen to music and to draw and things like that. But we've got to create space for them to be creative and be prepared for pushback and not cave. It's going to take a few weeks if you've never done this. But as long as you have some art materials in your house, you have books in your house, they have a place to listen to music. So that's why I say get an MP3 player so they can still have something if they're used to they need some stimulation. Building things we want, if you've young kids, stuff for dress up and things like markers and paint and clay. And so all this like stuff where kids can be creative, sporting equipment. So like if your kids like sports, like if they can go to some place and there's a trampoline or skipping ropes and balls, like kids entertain themselves for thousands of years. They have not lost that. Like
No.
we only had devices in the last, what, since television was the 1950s, and we've owned this,
Mm-hmm.
what, the iPhone was released in 2009.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's all. Yeah.
it's not a long time. I assure you they can do this, but you've got to give space for their brain to kind of readjust and go in a different gear. And so I said, make the space for them. And when they come to you and they say they're bored, I'm like, that must be really hard to be bored. But being, I told my kids since they were little, being bored is really good for your brain. They're like, that's all you're going to tell me? I'm like, yep.
Yeah.
At one point, the pushback came. I said, if you're really bored, I've got some chores if you want to do them around the house. I've got a whole list of things. And sometimes when they were little, they wanted to do chores with us because, when they're tiny, they want to do everything their parents do. So that could backfire. Or you could think of it as an opportunity to train them to get them on housework. So I took advantage of that many times. But, once they get a little older, if you give them that option, they're like, I'll figure it out. And they do. They will find something else to do because they don't want to do that. And it really just takes consistency of your response of being like, that's really hard to be bored. Kiddo, you've got a whole basement of stuff downstairs. Like, and honestly, Tanny's the same way. We just leave them to their devices. And I don't mean devices. I mean, like, they have to figure it out and they just know we're not going to cave. Then I'm just amazed with the stuff that they come up with.
Right. And that's why they won't push too hard at some point, because they know it doesn't matter what I say, there's no screen.
There's just no screen. And it doesn't mean we can't, watch, we can't have it sometimes, but it's not like I live in a screen-free home. It's very limited as to how often they have it.
And it's possible. And I don't want a parent thinking that they have to go to the extreme of no screens, but at least just being mindful, like what does screen time look like in my home? What does it look like for me as the adult? What does it look like for my kids, right? Because we have to be mindful of what we're modeling for our children as well. And having, limits and boundaries around screens in our home, I think is healthy. No screens at the dinner table, no screens upstairs for us. We have, these are the rules in our home. There is no phone on the table. Phones are turned off. Dinner time is very important in our home. And then when it's bedtime, there are no phones that go upstairs. So no iPads, no phones that go upstairs. And there's very limited time in terms of screen time. So it's possible. Like people say it sometimes, like, how do you do it with 3 kids that are small? It's just possible. Like you said, they stay busy. They know it doesn't matter what they ask me. If it's not 3:30, it's not screen time in our home. And so don't ask me any questions.
The longer we can wait, the better too.
Yeah. When they're small.
Yeah, my son didn't see a TV or a screen, neither did Tanya's, until they were 2. No screen, no TV, no anything.
Right. Same. Yeah.
So it wasn't that hard. Like that was the culture of our family where we just said no. I think the only exception would have been video time, like where we would FaceTime family members. So to be fair, like we knew the research was okay with that if it's someone they had a connection to. But so we very gradually introduced television, and I don't know if they even saw an iPad. Maybe they were 6,
Right.
And even then it was the family.
Minimal. Right.
So it's a little harder retroactively if you have to back things up, but I have a blended family and we had to introduce my 10-year-old, now she's 16, had no limits on screens her whole life. And to retroactively go back was the most painful year of my life, is to start to remove that and cull it back, if that makes sense. And to this day, she's now 16. And the rule is still during the week, Monday through Friday, when she's in school, nobody is to have a device after 6 p.m., period, including the adults. So we read, we draw, we go outside, we go for walks. There's organized activities, but they all go away. Everybody's. And it's now become a culture in our family that these are the rules. Like, this is just what we do. And there isn't pushback anymore. Like they just learn that this is just what we do. We put them away. They go in the office. They get locked up. This is what we do.
I love that. I love that. And I also want to be mindful that some parents, I know there's pushback when we post about this. And I know I just had a conversation with somebody inside our membership that was saying, both my kids have their own tablet, and I can't imagine that not happening, because when I need downtime, this is what I get downtime. I watch screen, they watch their own shows on their tablet, and it gives me that hour and a half that I need. And I said, it's not about turning that off completely. If that's all you need, that's fine. But if that's what you're needing all the time, there's a very big difference. And that's what I mean by kind of assessing what screens look like in your home. I think it's always important to do that.
Yeah, and I have times where I just want to watch a show, and I'm like, you guys watch your show, I watch my show. Of course, there are times for that, but I'm also aware that there's a difference between watching on a tablet and a TV, though. And so one of the rules in our home is that movies are always better than TV, and TV is always better than tablets. So we also have to look at the types of media kids are looking at and the quality. So it's about not always just about quantity, it's about the quality of what's happening and how that interferes with the brain. So my kids just know the order of like how toxic things can be in terms of their well-being. So they just
Right.
know if I'm watching show, they're like, "Does it have to be a movie?" I'm like, "Yes, it does." And it has to be on the TV. It cannot be on a tablet. And they have
Mm,
to learn to negotiate and take turns. And this is part of, siblings and figuring this out. But they eventually do figure
mhm.
it out, because if they don't, then the TV goes off and they don't like that either. So again, it's about, what they're ingesting too, that I'm really careful about.
Right. I just want to touch on one little thing, one last thing that I saw on your account online that was really interesting to me, which you kind of alluded to right now, which was, Mommy, how can I be helpful? And I think that sometimes as parents, we say, do this or watch TV or go play while I do this, right? While I cook, while I clean, while I'm folding the laundry, whatever it is. And we forget that our kids are sitting there sometimes saying, like, I want to help. I want to do something. And my kids will often ask to help. Sometimes it ends up in a disaster. We've had, pancake mixture all over the floor and they wanted to mix the pancakes, stir the mixture. I get it, but they often want to help. And I love that you've brought that up. What advice do you have for parents who think that leads to more of a mess, or clothes will not be folded the way that it should be, and so I might as well just do it?
Okay, so kids at 18 months have this beautiful thing that happens in their brain that says, I want to attach through copying, through being similar. So at 18 months, there is this big desire, especially between 18 months and 3 years, for kids to want to help. They want to copy everything you do, jump on that immediately. That is where, if you look at the research, the sociological research done by Micheline Duclef, she wrote Hunt, Gather, Parent.
Oh yeah.
She gives an amazing book. I've interviewed her a few times now. And her research would state in some of the most helpful, resilient cultures in the world, they bring kids in, and any chores the parent does, the kids do with them. Everything. So I started this when my kids, 18 months, they vacuumed, they cleaned windows, they helped with yard work. Now, is it done well? No, that's not the point. We're
Right.
training them to be helpful. We're training them to learn the skills of how to keep a household. We're teaching that there aren't, static gender roles when it comes to division of labor in the house. And kids then feel capable. They feel like they have a place in your family. So they have the offshoot is belonging. They feel they're significant, that they can make a difference, and it increases their levels of self-esteem. And then when they go to someone else's house, when they see like things in disarray or someone cooks a meal, their go-to is, how can I be helpful? But I always tell my kids, and this is something we talk about, I'm probably every other day. Like, it's just ingrained in my kids. We live on a ranch, actually, so we're out in the country. And I always tell them, and I wouldn't be any different if I was in town, this house does not run without all of us. It is the whole family that runs this ranch. So the second one person is stepping out, it impacts everybody. So we're always looking for, if someone cooks the meal, someone's doing dishes. If someone's doing the dishes, someone's clearing the table. If there is dirty laundry, we ask, how can I help? Like, the basement's a mess. It doesn't matter who messed it up. We're all helping clean it. And it's kind of a culture that you establish about, and it's a we culture, not a you culture. And that involves parents doing things alongside their kids. And that's where I think the pushback happens, is we want to rush through to get it done. And this is where we reduce organized activity, so we have more time to cultivate this helpfulness and this culture of social kind of appropriation with one another. Like, I need to help and be, help with groceries and help the neighbor. And you're always just pointing their attention to it, is like, what's going on in this house? But if you don't slow down, if you're always running between organized activities, you don't have you can't cultivate that.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Thank you for sharing your insights. I think that everything that you've spoken about, I think allows us to like it reminds us to kind of step back, right, and evaluate what's happening in my home. How am I parenting? What style have I done? How am I applying boundaries? And is there room for pause, for time, for space in this home? Because I think all of that, it's not about following certain rules, but this guideline allows us to step back and kind of see, like, what's the culture? You've brought that up a few times as well, which I think we need to look at that. What's the culture in my home? Sometimes when I talk to teachers, I talk about like the culture, the work culture that leads to you feeling more motivated and supported and feeling like you have your autonomy, right? And it's that leader that sets the tone for that culture and says, like, because if they're micromanaging, you don't have your autonomy. If they're being rude and disrespectful, or they don't set the boundaries, you don't know, you're lost and you're confused, or you feel disrespected. The culture applies in our home as well. And so why not look at it that way and think about that question, like, what's the culture I want to create? One that a leader is strong, that my child knows what the boundaries are, and that they're given that space to again, that autonomy, belongingness, and competence. It's the self-determination theory. That's what I was thinking about before, which is, it's our psychological need. And so we need these, our children need them. So I truly appreciate everything that you shared with us. And I will put the link to your book in the show notes as well, and to your social media. Is there anything you'd like to share with our audience?
No, I think it's great. You can visit us at the instituteofchildpsychology.com. If you have a child who's struggling with mental health, whether it's attention deficit disorder, anxiety, trauma, ODD, OCD, all the Ds,
Yeah.
we have a lot of resources for parents who are like, I don't, maybe I can't afford therapy, or I don't know what to do to support them. That's why we're there. We're there specifically. We want to help parents, of course, with general parenting stuff. That's why we wrote our book. But the courses that we have are taught by some of the top professionals in the world in their area of specialty. So you're getting information that you'd normally have to pay thousands of dollars for in therapy in one place. So you know what to do with your child if they're really struggling. So you can visit us there to get the help that you need to support your child if they're struggling.
And I know there are lots of people that either here in Canada as well can't get, can't see somebody. I know somebody that was on a waiting list for 6 months and still hadn't heard back. And so it's important to have resources like yours. So thank you so much. I appreciate you and Tanya very much in the work that you guys do. Thank you
Awesome.
again.
Thank you.